normally when you parent, children will be like, a bird, yes, a dog, yes, a flower, yes, my child is a genius. Why has that man got stage? Oh, no, 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 no. And it kind of paints the idea, certainly to a young child, that talking about disability or asking about disability is rude or wrong.
Mm.
And I think that that's the opposite to what we should actually be teaching them. And if we put it on the curriculum, but not in a forced kind of crowbar way, don't just sit them down and be, all right, kids, disability, 3 days of this, and we can all move the hell on. But kind of weave it into everything and make it that everyday conversation. And yeah, which also means that we as disabled people need to be very good at learning to tell our stories to multiple audiences and making it age appropriate and making it accessible, because it's very easy to slip into either medical jargon or kind of political or social model, medical model, grey area between people first language, so on and so forth. That we miss the human side of disability and almost strip our own personhood out of our personhood, if that makes any sense. I remember when I realised how I might not be doing it as well as I could be. I was doing like a Genes for Genes school roadshow, and we'd written this cracking assembly about sickle cell anemia and what it is, what it does, how it works. And then we walked in, and the school were like, "Oh, we've had to change the year group you're talking to. You're now talking to year 3." And I'm like, "We wrote this for year 7. What what are we doing?" And we just, me and my colleague looked at each other in just blind panic and tried to wing it. So now I'm prepared for that kind of thing. If it's like a young child, I know how to roll with it. If it's a teenager, I know how to roll with it. If it's an adult, I know how to roll with it. And it's also a case of, do people really want to know? Some people are just being kind of hostile and a bit aggy about it. And I'm sure we've all been in those things like, oh, you're not disabled, or, well,
Mm.
if you have immunity from a face mask, where's your sunflower lanyard that you're not legally compelled to wear, by the way? And yeah, it needs to be an honest, but compassionate conversation with everyone that should be encouraged. So yes, children asking about disability should absolutely be encouraged by parents, because if they don't ask questions, how else are they going to learn it? That's why we ask questions anyway as humans, is this thirst and question knowledge and truth. So yeah, questions are great. Yeah, and if you can remove the curiosity before it becomes fear or anxiety, or on a more extreme case, prejudice, then the better it is for everyone. It's a no lose situation. Disability is a very broad category with a plethora of different conditions and types of disability out there. No one is going to be exactly the same, therefore, no one is going to have the exact same experience. And whilst people are very good at telling their story, it's sometimes quite hard to hear other people's, and discussions can become quite one-sided. Like in the world of kind of NF1 and facial disfigurement and what have you, I'm very much kind of well held in that domain. But if you take me drag me into deep water in conversations about kind of spinal injuries and what have you, I need to be doing a lot more listening and a lot less talking. And I think there needs to be a two-way street of communication within the disabled community, where people have their own stories and are very good at telling them, and we should absolutely listen to them. But in turn, they should also listen to other people's, and because there's a lot of really weird infighting and bickering that exists in the disabled community on things like, as I alluded to before, social model, medical model. Should special needs schooling exist, or should it just be incorporated into mainstream schooling so we can socialize children better? Is it just, I'm not a disabled person, I'm a person with a disability? And these are all cracking conversations to be having, but they aren't the most important thing. Let's get equal standing, kind of legally learn each other's stories and crack that, and then we can have the other. I nearly said stupid. Then we can have the other arguments, like a little bit later on. But I don't think it's unrealistic. I just think it requires a little bit more nuance than people think or think or understand. And again, it's you don't get it till you get it. I don't claim to be an expert on chronic syndrome. Luckily, I've got a very good friend who is, and so and this comes back to then kind of asking questions about it. And so, yeah, remember, your story is your story. Other people's stories are their stories, and tell yours and be willing to listen to other people's. And then eventually that will just become a day-to-day thing. So I think it's realistic, but I think it requires a lot more work than maybe we thought. I think prejudice does occur, and if people think it isn't, or that you can justify it by saying, "Oh, mate, freedom of speech," then you don't know how freedom of speech works. Freedom of speech and freedom of consequences are very different things. Also, we don't have that in the UK. I don't know why you're quoting the First Amendment of the American Constitution at me in a crazy attempt to justify your bigotry. And but also not everything bad that happens to me is prejudice. If I jump off my roof and hit the floor, that doesn't mean gravity hates disabled people. That means I made a bad choice armed with poor information. But I think when it comes, you deal with it, and I think you need to kind of call it out for what it is, but also do it in a way that's sort of classy and dignified. I'm a big fan of humor and being a bit sarcastic and a bit satirical, which I know doesn't always translate overseas well or work well on Twitter. But the people that get it, and it happens. There's this weird self-acceptance where a lot of disabled people who experience prejudice just have this fatalistic complex of, oh, that's just how the real world is, when really it isn't. And you should absolutely call it out, nail it, and hold people to account. Which is why I'm always dealing with people on social media very, very directly. Oh, you blocked me. Why do you hate freedom of speech? It's like, I don't. If I came in your house and kicked the fuck off, you'd throw me out your house. And Facebook's a private platform. It's not, you've agreed to abide by certain terms and conditions that you violated, and I now don't want to engage with you, which is part of my freedoms that you hold so dear. And there's this weird double standard to the whole thing as well that makes me feel mildly infuriated. Like, oh, you have an opinion, you snowflake. Yeah, so do you. And we don't have the same one, but, crack on. Like, everyone just needs to grow up and get over themselves a little bit, don't they? I think that's the real secret there. You figured out I'm disabled. Awesome. One thing I've started doing is I've started pretending that I've only just noticed it after they pointed it out. You do deal with it. And when you, because I've also cast TV programs around disability. I did 6 years working only on datables, the first 6 years, the good ones, before all the language fell off a flipping cliff. And you have what's known as the talk of doom, where you're reminded how TV works and how social media works. And I think when you're talking about disability, it's important you've got to represent. If I'm on TV going, disabled people are great, and then when people meet me in the real world, I act like a knob. That doesn't work. There's a real juxtaposition there. So you handle it well. You take the selfies. You're nice. You have the chat. And I'm like a people person anyway. And I think if people are gonna have the balls to come up to you, talk to you, and say something nice to you, the least you can do is take a minute, 2 minutes out of your day, and kind of like take a selfie and have the chat. Because you might have just made their day. You might have stopped them from be the one thing that stopped them from going home and kind of crying, or you might have just brought someone out of a really bad funk. And also that's how I'd want people to treat me. If I went up to someone who I'd seen on TV whose work I liked, that's how I'd want to be treated. So that's how I've decided to treat other people. Luckily, most people are really nice. Just to say you ignore it, I think is an exaggeration. You always clock it, but you've got to, I suppose, learn not to let it bother you. I can't control other people's reactions to me, and I can't control other people's curiosity, fear, anxiety, prejudice, whatever vernacular you want to use. The only thing I can control is how I react to it. And I can either let it wind me up, or I can put my head down, crack on, and do my thing, kind of Pearson that Pearson, so to speak. And I think when you're born with a disability, you do build up a resilience quickly because you're so young and so malleable and way more adaptable. I suppose it's easier in that sense, and it's also quite straightforward because I've known no different. I don't know what the other half of Eden is like. Whereas for someone who acquires a disability, I imagine that transition can be quite harsh. You almost got to rediscover who you are. It becomes such a integral part of your identity that you've got to make all these reassessments, and your life becomes very different. So I don't think we're ever going to truly eliminate misconceptions, yada yada yada, so on and so forth about disability. But I think it's a lot easier to understand for the general public to understand physical disability because it's tangible. There's something there. They can see it, they can clock it, and they can be like, there's something happening there. Whereas if you look at some things like my brother's got epilepsy and short-term memory loss. But to look at him, you wouldn't know that. And so when he starts kind of asking the same question over and over, or has like one of the smaller fits where he just goes a bit blank and a bit quiet and a bit glassy-eyed for a while, you just think he's a bit of a weirdo or a bit of a plonker, and you don't cut him the same slack that you would me. And so I think, again, it comes down to conversations and normalizing it and getting to a point where because when people say, I don't see your disability, I think that's a really disingenuous thing to say, because of course you see it, it's on my face. And you're also saying it's not important. When people say, I don't see disability, what you're saying is, I choose not to see disability because it's either not important to me or I don't want to have to deal with it. Rather, what the actual thing people should be trying to get to in their heads is, I see your disability, but it's not the most important part of your fully rounded 360-degree character. That's the attitude that we need to be trying to foster, rather than this sort of slightly Disney, you're disabled, I hadn't noticed, kind of, mate, try harder. Disabled people are just people ultimately. And I'm quite autodidactic. I speak well, I present well. I can also be a bit of a prick on rare occasions. And yeah, outside of my disability and having a couple of broken chromosomes here and there, I'm just like everyone else. I have hobbies, I have interests, I have a girlfriend. Some disabled people, shut yourselves in, even have sex. I know. So yeah, disability is a thing, but it's not the thing. And I don't see why disabled people should always have to be boxed in to make it the thing, and have to justify their existence in a wider society. And to the guy yesterday that thought my girlfriend was my carer, you're a dick.